Hello, my name is Alexa, and this is my question of fact, value, or policy speech. Imagine waking up in a prison cell, surrounded by nothing but cinder block and steel, feeling as though your humanity has been stripped away. I believe that there needs to be a raised awareness of how deeply flawed our country's criminal justice system is. Today, I will discuss how the country's criminal justice system intentionally targets the racial minorities and the mentally ill. I will explain the racial disparities observed in the criminal justice system, and then I will discuss the use of solitary confinement. The U.S. criminal justice system affects minority groups at disproportionate rates compared to whites. According to the article Addressing Racial Disparities in Incarceration, published on August 25, 2011, if current trends continue, 1 of every 3 African American males can expect to go to prison in his lifetime, as can 1 of 6 Latino males, compared to 1 in 17 white males. In general, African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans are incarcerated at higher rates than whites. Racial disparities also exist in a system that is called the school-to-prison pipeline. Referenced in the article The School-to-Prison Pipeline, published in the spring of 2013, hundreds of school districts across the country employ discipline policies that push students out of the classroom and into the criminal justice system at alarming rates. 2 studies conducted by the U.S. Department of Education found that African American students were 3.5 times more likely than their white classmates to be suspended or expelled, and that more than 70% of students arrested in school-related incidents or referred to law enforcement are Black or Hispanic. A second method of discrimination can be observed by studying the war on drugs, which began in the 1970s and still exists today. According to the article Addressing Racial Disparities in Incarceration, published on August 25, 2011, racial disparities in drug arrests then translate into disparities in sentencing that are exacerbated by the proliferation of mandatory sentencing policies adopted since the 1980s. This has resulted in African Americans and Latinos constituting 65% of drug offenders in state prisons in 2008. Drug arrests involving the sale of 500 grams of powder cocaine resulted in the offender serving a 5-year prison sentence. A higher probability of these offenders were white or Latino. However, drug arrests involving the sale or possession of just 5 grams of crack cocaine resulted in the offender serving the same 5-year sentence. About 80% of individuals for this type of offense were African American. This portrays that African Americans are punished more severely than whites or Latinos. Communities of color experience the fallout of their loved ones being imprisoned. According to the article Addressing Racial Disparities in Incarceration, published on August 25, 2011, these include family stress and dissolution, neighborhoods experiencing high mobility of residents cycling in and out of prison, and limited employment prospects. Incarceration destabilizes the lives of people of color who struggle to find their new normal. Next, I will discuss the use of solitary confinement and the damage that it causes. Solitary confinement has become more commonplace, even though it is used to punish and not rehabilitate. According to medicalnewstoday.com, last accessed on November 2, 2020, in general, the criminal justice system in the U.S. uses solitary confinement more widely and for longer periods than other countries. Solitary confinement negatively impacts the mental and physical health of the imprisoned. Solitary can cause mental health issues such as anxiety and stress, depression, aggression, cognitive problems, paranoia, and psychosis, to name a few. The more serious cases of isolation can lead to self-harm or suicide. The physical health effects caused by isolation include chronic headaches, digestive problems, fatigue, heart palpitations, sleep problems, and weight loss. Referenced in medicalnewstoday.com, last accessed on November 2, 2020, studies indicate that social isolation increases the likelihood of death by 26 to 32%. Racial minorities and the mentally ill are placed in solitary confinement at disproportionate rates compared to whites. According to medicalnewstoday.com, last accessed on November 2, 2020, Black people and Hispanic males account for a higher percentage of those in isolation than of those in the general prison population. Also, the American Psychological Association report that people with impaired mental health with impaired mental health are still disproportionately represented in solitary confinement. Their mental health deteriorates further, and they are less adaptable to the real world upon re-entry into society. Referenced in the article, Solitary Confinement and Mental Illness in U.S. Prisons, A Challenge for Medical Ethics, published in March 2010, solitary confinement is recognized as difficult to withstand. Indeed, psychological stressors, such as isolation, can be as clinically distressing as physical torture. Solitary is especially harmful for those who suffer from serious mental health issues. Prisons are not well equipped to treat the mentally ill, putting these individuals at greater risk of mental and emotional deterioration. According to the article Solitary Confinement and Mental Illness in U.S. Prisons, A Challenge for Medical Ethics, published in March 2010, 60% of state correctional systems responding to a survey on inmate mental health reported that 15% or more of their inmate population had a diagnosed mental illness. Due to the unforgiving environment of solitary and the lack of proper psychiatric treatment, the mentally ill have little chance of improving. Solitary confinement is a topic of genuine concern for human rights experts, who express that prisons are carrying out human rights violations. According to ccrjustice.org, last access on November 3, 2020, exposure to such life-shattering conditions clearly constitutes cruel and unusual punishment, in violation of the Eighth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and international laws. This type of environment is extremely harmful for anyone, regardless of how stable you were before being put in isolation. Human rights experts would like to see this practice get abolished. In conclusion, the U.S. criminal justice system serves as a symbol of oppression that blatantly fails to rehabilitate those who find themselves trapped within it. Today, we have looked at how the country's criminal justice system is designed to dehumanize the incarcerated, in particular racial minorities and the mentally ill. The U.S. criminal justice system affects minority groups at disproportionate rates compared to white populations. Solitary confinement has become more commonplace, even though it is used to further punish and not rehabilitate. As is clearly illustrated, the criminal justice system is a flawed system that significantly harms the lives of minorities and the mentally ill. Thank you.